had the fortunate privilege of being able to talk to Thorsten today for quite some time. This is an excellent interview where he talks about all the difficult things of making and creating an editor. And the thing is that he loved Neovim, and now he's moved over to using Zed. And not only did he move over to using Zed, he works at Zed. He makes these features, and he just goes into such amazing details of things you will never think about when it comes to creating and maintaining an editor that is used by a lot of people. You got to stick around and watch this one. It is out of this world, and Thorsten truly is a treasure. Thorsten, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, so I've been pretty excited about actually having you on because you've recently left SourceGraph and not too long ago and have joined a new company, Zed, the text editor.
Yes.
Correct.
He left, in December last year, and then I joined Zed in January. So I think I just crossed the 6-month mark, if my math, somebody correct me, but yeah, 6 months at Zed.
That's very cool. So in SourceGraph, you were doing things related to language features, right? And so this was a fairly natural transition to go from SourceGraph to Zed, or was this a kind of like a more unnatural one for you?
I would say natural in the sense that looking back over the past few years, I've worked in with developer tools, and this came up in a conversation with a friend last week. I actually started building developer tools like 10 years ago, and then, internal tools at the company. And then I joined SourceGraph 5 years ago, building, CLI stuff, working on SourceGraph itself. I did work on some language stuff at SourceGraph, but only for a year or so. And the rest was more in the backend, managing, how we store code and how we search code. I built batch changes at SourceGraph, which allows you to do large-scale changes across hundreds or thousands of repositories. And then the step to Zed, or switching to Zed, is more like going even further down the stack, even closer to the developer, right? Like it's a text editor, so it's a developer tool as close as it can be to the developer. So that is the natural part of it, in that I do like dev tools. I do like working with and building stuff for developers, but I basically worked, all my life as an engineer. I worked with some kind of web technology. There was always a SQL database involved. There was always a request being sent from somewhere to somewhere. There was always an API, a GraphQL API, REST API, whatever, but something like this. And now going to Zed, we do have a backend, we do have APIs, there is a SQL database, but I mostly work on the text editor itself. So this is more System Z programming, native GUI app development, right? Which is new for me. Like I worked on Ghosty, or hacked on Ghosty last year a little bit, the terminal emulator, and I kind of found a taste for it. But that stuff is still new. I never worked with the main render loop, for example, before, last year. And now this is, I spent the last few days looking into our render loop on the Linux port of Zed. So that is, well, it's new for me, right? It's not like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing again at a different company, but it's a different job.
All right, so that it is different enough that it's more of the same and different all at the same time. You're still building for developers, so you still have that same expectation. I've always been on the developer side of tools as well. I've always just found that to be most enjoyable, just because I feel like the people that I'm developing for are the people I know best.
Yeah.
And so at least I have some general idea of what they probably want and need, and I feel like I just have better gut instinct in it.
Yeah, and I always say what I like about building developer tools is that the stuff that you find interesting about a project, the technology, often, that's also the thing that your customers find interesting, Yeah. Whereas I worked in B2C startups before, and I guess you also noticed from Netflix that there's a marketing, can move the needle as much as engineering in the business. And with developer tools, I find that as an engineer, you can move the needle. It's not just, it does not matter whether the server is 500 milliseconds faster or slower because we don't have the marketing budget. But with developer tools, I think it counts. And yeah.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And the nice part is that, marketing is kind of an interesting thing for developer tools because it is very, very important to have
Yeah.
people talk about it, right? Like that's going to be your main way that you get people is just having other developers excited about it. So in some sense, the marketing is a bit different. But on top of it,
Yeah.
any person that's like bigger and says, "Oh, I really like Zed," that doesn't give you a pass in. Someone's not going to, buy your product or whatever because they someone they heard it, they get to look at it, and that's where your engineering comes in to play, where
Yeah.
it actually makes the sale, which is kind of like it's a very different perspective than B2C.
Yeah. I mean, one anecdote is that when I joined Sourcegraph, I was working on our CLI tool back then, back then it was just the CLI tool to interface with our API and search code. And Quinn, our CEO at Sourcegraph, he said, well, I was talking to him about the API or whatever, or the command line flags or something. And, where I came from, like B2C companies, nobody would give a shit about the command line flags of your CLI tool. And he was saying, no, that's the API. That's the contract we have with our customers because our customers use that CLI. So this is the API, the command line flags. That's the thing. That's the product. So you need to care about this. And I don't know. I think that's true. Like, look at editor is a good example. Your customers care about the schema of your settings file. They have strong opinions about it, and they have so many strong opinions. And it just all of the APIs or a lot of the APIs that you work with as an engineer, maybe they're mirror image, but maybe the same APIs they also get exposed to your customers, right? And I don't know. I find that enjoyable.
I do too. The funny thing is, just 8-9 months ago, while at Netflix, I had my boss, and we would actually chat and talk about how we want the ordering of CLI flags.
Yeah.
Do we want it so that you can pass, say, the game ID in as like the first parameter, and it just is automatically assumed like, okay, this is the session ID, and now you do that, like you now operate on the rest of it? Or do we have that? Do we pass it as like, how do we actually want these things? Like, how do we want to do nouns and verbs, and how do we actually set this up such that it makes a lot of sense? And you realize like how important these things are because we've all used crappy CLI tools.
Yeah.
Right. And we're just like, whatever. But when you use a really good one, you're like, oh, this was like super easy to use. Like I find that once I started learning it, I really enjoy JQ's command line interface. It just took a moment for me to understand what it had to do. Like I had to go read the docs for a moment. And then once I learned it, I was like, oh, this is actually really, really good. Like this is actually a shockingly good interface.
And not to make it too big of a point out of it, but I would argue that to some degree, we engineers aren't super rational when we make technological choices, right? We are influenced by a lot of our impressions. And if you're the engineer at a company that has to pick a tool that your company uses, say a database, right? And then you play around with 5 different databases, the one that has the most intuitive interface for you on your first try, I would say that leaves an impression for you because you then think, oh, their CLI, that, it's same defaults. Like it has the exact same flags that I expected. It works exactly the way I expect it to. And that kind of reflects then, or you project that onto the rest of the product. And then you go, I think we should go with database vendor A because their CLI makes a lot of sense. So
yeah. Dude, I can't tell you how much that's true. I will actually use, like, if someone right now said, hey, you have to use a front-end framework right now, and you have to build a website with a front-end framework, I would probably end up choosing Svelte just because I really have liked my interactions with Rich Harris. And I'd probably also use Astro because I really have enjoyed my interactions with Fred. Just like my choices for technology at that point are going to be much more on the side of people that I like than they are on anything else.
I agree. I looked into Tailwind, which is not my forte, I guess, because I like what Adam Wathan says about using Tailwind and how much thought he put into it. And yes, there's, people can criticize it, whatever, but just knowing that it comes from a guy who thought about this problem space for 10, 15 years and put a lot of effort in, that gave him or that product the bump, right? Made me look at it deeper.
Yeah, it's weird. We are, people always try to say they talk about trade-offs. People choose the job. People choose the job based on the tool, right? Like
Yeah,
they just are like, I want to use this tool. I like this
yeah,
guy. I want to use this tool, and then they end up just building their job around the tool, not the
yeah.
other way around. At least as far as I can see. Okay, let's get to Zed. Okay, so
Yes.
you are on the Linux side of the dev and also the Vim side of Zed, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't have clear teams yet, right? People
Yeah.
work on different things. Sorry, I can't, 10 people, around 10, 11, 12, 13 people maybe. So people switch around. But I mean, I've been here 6 months and I think I merged like 250 PRs or something. And I would say if you classify them, I worked on macOS performance stuff with Antonio, like getting it to render at 120 FPS. I fixed some bugs in Vim. I fixed quite a few bugs in a lot of the language server, supports things. That, for example, uh, the issues that I constantly get tagged in are around Go please doesn't pick up the environment variables or stuff like this, right? Which
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of my bread and butter, I guess, Unix process management. But all over the place, I guess. Then I built Git blame into the editor because I missed it, like, from Fugitive, where you can
Yeah.
open the little split on the side with the blame
Yes.
information. I wanted that in Z, so I built it. And now for the last few weeks, I've been working on the Linux port. That exact that
Yeah. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I too have that exact same problem where like that's the thing I want to use
Yeah.
because I like it a lot.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then Linux, I've been wrestling with the X11 port of Linux. We do have Wayland support and X11, and I'm sure you noticed there's not one Linux, right?
Yeah.
There's multiple Linux versions, and people use different things. And my desktop machine that I have here has an NVIDIA card and only runs X11, so I've been working on that. And yeah, it's been interesting. The
Learning a
different
lot.
configuration. Yeah, learning a lot. Things I want to learn, things I don't want to learn, but yeah, there's learning.
Isn't that all developer experiences? I learned some things I really was curious about, and then learned a lot of things I really did not want to learn at all. But
Yes.
here I am.
Nobody ever was happy about learning something about YAML, I guess. But yeah,
No.
X11 it's interesting in that it's so old. Like I think X11, the protocol is 40 years old. And I mean, we all know that Wayland has come to replace it and has been trying to do that for also 10 years now.
I'm still
And
using X11 right now.
same, I'm still using it too. And if we would say we only support Wayland, I think people in chat would get angry. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff. And then you find libraries where this is the new way of doing things with X11. And then you look at it and it's also 14 years old, which is fine, right? Like mature
Yeah.
technology, but it's also, you have to go through layers and layers of the internet to find information that you're looking for. And there's no best practices. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the nature of legacy code. As time goes on, you just get these new versions of it. I mean, you see this stratification in every application you've ever used. I'm sure it's even happening in Zed. There's a certain way things are handled, and then even over time, you have new ways you're doing it, and now you just have this odd like stratification where if a new person comes on and they pick the wrong one, they're going to implement it in the legacy way, not in the new way.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually one of the biggest problems. I mean, you can, talk about this coming from Netflix, but I saw this at Sourcegraph. A lot of our large customers with tens of thousands of repositories, hundreds of thousands even. One of their big problems is we have thousands of engineers. There's 100 coming in and 100 leaving every year. How do we avoid people finding the code that they shouldn't find, right? How do we ensure that for thousands of developers, they use the right piece of code or the right library or, whatever component or something? It's a large scale problem, I guess.
Yeah. No, I've experienced it many times where people ask me, why did I do it this way? I'm like, oh, I thought I used the best one. They're like, that's the worst one. And I'm like, oh, well, Yet here we are. What am I supposed to do now? Okay, so you did some fixing on the Vim stuff. Tell me about this. How is the Z editor's Vim import? How's the motions?
The motions are pretty good, getting more complete by the day. I published a blog post 1.5 weeks ago about Zed's Vim mode. Basically, we don't strive for 100% compatibility because it does not make sense in that there's some fundamental things in which Zed and Vim differ, mostly based on the fact that Zed has been built from the ground up to be a multiplayer editor. So we need these base data structures, we need the CRDTs, we need our buffers and the way they work. So we can't just rip this out and put Neovim in embedded. So our Vim mode it's one crate, like it's all in Rust, right? It's one crate actually called Vim, and everything is in there. And it's just been, war in the trenches. Like when I came on 6 months ago, we had a lot of stuff already. I wasn't missing too much. I was missing macros and registers and marks and whatnot. But a lot of the motions were there. But then people open tickets and they go, what was it? Like, how CC can, center the line in the screen? Or ZZ, I guess CC.
Yeah. ZZ.
And then, people open tickets and they go, did you know that this takes account? Like you can say 5 ZZ because that centers the 5th line. And there's so many things like this coming up where, actually, if you visually select something and then indent it, then the cursor goes from the bottom of your selection to the top of the selection. And if you repeat it, stuff like this, So we've been banging out these little things one by one and adding support for more, that everything that should supports the dot operator to repeat, support counts, support whatever, the visual mode version of it. And I think we're pretty good. Like we're getting there. And now we have registers too. We have marks. Obviously not all the registers because, as you know, that kind of depends on this whole memory model that Vim has.
Can you duplicate most of the registers? Because %sign is what, previous file? Pound is current file.
Yes, we do have. What's a motion? It's what is it? Is it Control-6 or is it
that's previous. That's alternate file.
Yeah, we do have some of that because we do have the alternate file. We have a buffer picker and you can toggle between them. I don't know whether we have that register yet, but I think you can get close. But the idea is that we keep what makes ZZ and then take as much from Vim or Neovim as we can. And try to merge them as well as possible.
Can you explain that a bit more? Because I'm trying to figure out what are the things that Vim is bad, that would be a bad fit for Zed. Can you? Because I understand why. I read your article with the whole Neovim. Don't put in Neovim because you don't want Neovim. You want Zed. So I get that argument. What doesn't fit?
Concretely, let's say. Zed doesn't have the concept of hidden buffers, right? Where you can say you just have the buffers open, but they're not visible. Like in Zed, everything, you have the tab bar, and if you close something, it goes out of the tab bar, right? And then people say, I want to hide the tab bar. And yes, you can hide it and just not display it, but the fact is that somewhere down there, the buffers are attached to different tab bars. And that's a fundamental thing, whereas in Vim, right, you have the buffers and then you have the way they're displayed and you can display it in multiple windows and whatnot. And that's the first example that comes to mind, but I'm sure you can imagine when you close something and you close the last instance of it, Zed asks you, do you want to discard the changes or do you want to save? Because when you close the view or the window, it also closes the buffer. So that's, one example. Then the other is that how everything in Vim.
Hold on, we're getting some weird artifacts going on here.
Sorry.
All right. Try again. I think I may have to close your video and retry it again. Hold on. You want to try talking?
Yeah. Sorry. So everything in Vim, the command mode where you can basically pipe stuff to different commands, or you can pipe it to the shell and get the output back. from my years of using Vim, I think this is built into this at a fundamental level where you can use the exclamation point R to read stuff in, or you can pipe stuff to others, and you can even use the pipe operator, right, in Vim commands and stuff like that. And in Z, when you type colon, we open the command palette, and the command palette is the thing that you know from Sublime or VS Code or from IntelliJ, whatever, and that is a UI element, right? It's not a thing in which you type commands and you can pipe them. It's you have one command, and we can approximate this. We do support colon, and we have aliases, and I think you can by now you can also do %sign, search and replace when you have Vim mode enabled, but it's not the same as in Vim, right? And that's what I mean, like or superficially on the surface, you can make it look like Vim, and I think once you're inside the buffer, you can get really close because you can have the same motions. But other stuff, more fundamental stuff, is not as easy to translate. Or another example, Vim macros, right? If you hit record in Vim, it just records your keystrokes. And then you have this register that has the keystrokes in it, and you can actually take that register and print it into a buffer, or you can display it, and then you get the exact... And that's how you can create bindings, right? You can just dump that thing from the registers. Well, turns out that that's not a thing really in Z, where on the platform level, we get like the input from the OS, right? We get your keystrokes, but then we turn those into actions or bindings, right? So once they hit the Vim mode, they're already binding. So we need to find a different way to record the raw keystrokes so we can then replay them if we want to implement macros. So just stuff like this, right? It's not like we, can only get 70% of the way there. I think the bar is higher. We can get a lot closer to Neovim, but I think there's just some. It won't ever look like Neovim or feel like it to 100%. That's just not going to work.
Okay,
but
I think
fun
that makes
fact.
a lot of sense. Yeah.
Fun fact. I don't know if you noticed. That's what I wrote in the blog post. We do use Neovim in our tests. So for certain motions, the tests are pretty fun. You basically. You say editor state is the following text document, and then you say simulate keystrokes, and then you say compare the output, and then we take Neovim, the embedded version, the headless version, run the keystrokes in, get the output, and then we compare it to Z, and then we have Neovim is used to produce the golden test files, and then we just compare the different outputs, which is pretty sweet. So for stuff like, you hit 5J angle brackets 5.5K whatever DD, like what I can tell you what the output would be, and you can tell me too. But for that stuff, it's really nice to have Neovim confirm what exactly, or where the cursor is, where the selection is, stuff like that.
I was about to say, do you save like cursor position and all that off? What about do you save like the paste buffer or like the 0 through 10 registers?
No, not that. No.
Okay,
that's the other thing, right? Like the in Z, the clipboard is the main clipboard by default because it's a macOS application. But as you know, in Vim, a clipboard is not just a clipboard. You have the unnamed, and you have the plus and the 0 and whatnot. So we do have some config settings where people can say, I think, should a deletion go to the clipboard by default, which is what people often rebind in Vim or don't want. But that is just, another thing where you realize that's a fundamental difference. We just have one clipboard by default because that's what most operating systems have, except Linux, of course. But we kind of have to paper over it and make it look compatible.
Okay, that's actually a really interesting one because that's one of those things that I loathe the most, which is the inability to have like my Yank buffer versus my system clipboard. I like them being separate because I use them fundamentally different.
I think we do have a setting for the Yank buffer to be different. But when I paired with, Antonio from Z, who was never really a Vim user, he watched me and he paused, and I knew that I just did an embarrassing thing because what I did based on muscle memory was I worked around the fact that if I deleted something, it would clobber my clipboard. So I would, copy stuff, paste it somewhere, and then delete the thing that I actually wanted to paste over just because I didn't want it to fill up my clipboard and stuff like this. where he would go, you can just select text and paste over it. But I've been, trained not to, act too freely.
We gotta
with
get
my
you some better
clipboard.
remaps, man, because you can do underscore. You could go to the void register, and that way it
Yeah,
doesn't save to your primary. I do
people-
leader D to do a special paste to paste over
Yeah.
and hide the save. Come on, man, come on. You gotta get that void register. This is very good times. I know this is such a dorky conversation. Okay, so besides the Vim stuff, how is the Linux stuff going with Zed? How good is it to use Zed with Linux?
I would say pretty good. It's just we don't use any framework. We don't use Qt or GTK or something, but I think it's pretty good. Performance is there. I spent the day trying to get X11 performance improved. It's tricky. We might have to change our event loop there or how we handle our main loop. But I think on Wayland it's pretty good. I have it running on this laptop here. There's stuff missing, the whole client side versus server side window decorations and like how GNOME doesn't want to do this. So if you're on Wayland and GNOME, you have to bring your own window decorations, blah, blah, blah. And Michaela, who's on the team, she's been doing a fantastic job knocking out these things, adding our own window decorations. So now we know we need to do the resizing, but I would say it's getting along pretty well. We're still missing, this won't be in the first release. We're still missing a lot of the collaboration stuff where you can have calls in Zed and share your screen. Because as every Linux user here can imagine, audio and video in Linux, it's not, takes
I
some
use
effort.
Windows for streaming.
Yeah. There you go.
Real
Yeah.
talk. So
Yeah.
I get that. Okay,
But I would say it's going pretty well. Like we're talking about a few weeks here. I'm not gonna commit on a recording to a date, but I've been using it on Linux as my daily driver for the last 6 weeks. And I mean, as it turns out, a lot of people that are interested in text editors have wildly different preferences and opinions and taste. So where I think I do not care about this feature. I just, I use my window manager to maximize the window or stuff like this, right? And then people go, no, I need the built-in thing to maximize the window because for whatever reason they need it. So when for example, Vim Mode as an example, people opened a ticket. Scott Chacon, one of the founders of GitHub, he opened a ticket on the Zed issue tracker and saying he needs R, lowercase r and capital R, replace mode. He needs this.
I do.
And
I love them.
I read this and I thought nobody uses it. Who uses this? And then, why? Well, so look, then somebody said, I'm going to implement this. And they implemented somebody like a developer out from the community open source. They implemented it. And then Scott put a $500 bounty on it because it was so important to him. So he paid that person $500 just to implement capital R in our Vim mode. And I thought, that can't be. Like, who uses this? So then I mentioned it in the Vim blog post last week or 1.5 weeks ago. Then it got to Hacker News, and in these comments, one person was saying, this is a very strange article. Why does he say nobody uses R or capital R? And I'm telling you, there were 30 comments of people saying, 50-50, saying, I use this all the time, and the other side saying, why would you use this? Nobody uses this. Just use, CIW or CE or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think the text editor as a product is a really interesting category because there's such a long but also a fat tail of features where people say they cannot live without it, right?
Yeah.
Another example, I'm rambling, but another example, built-in Git support. For me in Vim, I would always use Control-Z to put Vim in the background, and then I would use Git on this, on the command line. From Fugitive, I would only use Blame. That was basically
Really?
it.
You didn't get into all the good stuff, really? Like a little GS?
No.
Look at that. I can see what I'm doing. I can look at it, look at all my changes.
No,
get the
I have
hell out of there.
fantastic Git shortcuts. I'm a pretty fast typer. Never used it, so I always used it on terminal. And
Dang.
then people say, I cannot live without built-in Git support. Like I need, bindings to create a commit, to see my staged stuff or to unstage stuff, like the Fugitive status screen. So I don't know, like that's technically you can live without it, right? You can always use Git
Yeah.
on the command line, but then people say I actually can't live without it. I would die without built-in Git support. So
Well, I hope your first response is you're weak if you die without built-in Git response, because that's
uh,
fairly ridiculous. But second off,
yeah, joking in these issues is not a joke, like people people are very serious about their preferences.
no, I get that. I mean, I primarily use Git from the CLI, but I enjoy having Fugitive as that because sometimes I'm just lazy. I just want to GSC or GSSC, and boom, I'm already Git added, committed, and then I'm typing a message and I call it a day. Right? Just
I have GST. So in Vim it would be Control Z, GST, Git status, JA adds everything, GC is a commit, GDC Git diffs cached, GD Git diff, Git LR log. So
yeah,
I don't know.
I've effectively deleted all of those in favor of Fugitive. So I CZZ to stash, CZA to unstash, CE to commit with an do a amend commit no edit.
Yeah, I think the difference between you and me might be that you may have learned how to use the Git diff view, which in my 15 years of Vim, I tried many times, but then I always fall back to Git diff on the command line because I just never could make sense of that diff view and how to navigate
you're missing
between
it. You're missing out on it. Here, I'll give you a quick little thing. I'm gonna add a couple new lines, right? So I just added a couple new lines. That's all I did. Just added a bunch of new lines right there. All right. Go in here, hit DV. Look at that. Look at that bad boy. Here, I'm going to move you out of the way for a second. Look at that. You can see on the left-hand side, there's nothing in there. On the right-hand side, you can see that. Come on, that's a good view. That's a good-looking view right there.
If the diff is not red and green, I cannot parse it. Then it's...
Well, it matches my color scheme. I have it so it's
I know. That's what I don't want. I'm just saying. I'm like everybody. I'm peculiar with my preferences.
I know. If this is not the most obvious sign that every last person uses it a specific way and is completely flabbergasted when someone else doesn't use it the identical way.
Yes.
I'd also like to say for the R thing, there's people that use R and capital R, and there's people who aren't good enough yet at Vim. Like that is what it is.
Okay. What about S, capital S? Do you use that?
Oh, you mean replace line and go into insert mode all at the same time? Who would not love a good capital S?
Did you ever use A and I with a count?
Now that I have not done. What is 5i?
Try it.
I didn't do anything.
Do 5i and then it should go into insert mode, right? And then you would hit escape, and then it repeats what you just type. Yeah, there you go. Same for A. So if you do, why would you need this? But it works, right?
Okay, that on the other hand, I don't understand. Well, I guess I see if you want to just fill in some quick data, right? And you just want to be like, hey, I need
then you use
100
dots.
zeros. I'm going to do 0, exit, and boom, got myself 100 zeros. Actually, that's pretty cool. You know what? I'm getting behind that. I love that. Thank you for sharing with me that beautiful stuff. Because how often do you want to do that? Because dot, you have to be like 0 that, you have to exit, and then you have to like dot it. And, unfortunately, I didn't dot in the correct location because of the space and all that. And then you have to try undoing a bunch of times.
10GS.
10GS.
Yes. GS is go to sleep. It puts Vim to sleep for 10 seconds. So it doesn't do anything. So that's also maybe a fundamental difference in that all of the Vim commands are part of the scripting language, Vim language, right? So in a scripting language, you might want to go to sleep, I guess. Do you want to do it when interacting with your editor? Probably not, but it's there because it's in the language. So
I did not know about GS. This is one of the... I'm getting to the point where I get fewer and fewer of these moments where someone shows me something I don't know about Vim, but you just did that.
Top shelf now. There's a separate
you
shelf.
are the double top shelf. You showed me two things. Number before I. This actually makes a lot of sense because every now and then I'll be typing something and all of a sudden I'll get like 3 copies of what I typed. I'm like, what the hell just happened?
That's
and I just moved on and I'm just like, whatever. Undo it, redo it. I don't know what just happened there.
It's like when you first discover Q:, and you think, how did I end up here?
And then, I hate that menu.
Well, I think when you do some advanced scripting and you build up like a map thing where you map like a one-off command, then it's pretty nice because then you can go up and you can just copy and paste it down, edit it, hit return, and have a new binding. But yeah, it's like, how did I end up here? What did I type? And it's the same with like the 5i or something else where you have the count stuck somewhere and then you did something else and you forgot that you had this in a buffer, buffer
And then
or
when
something.
you go quit, it quits all of Vim and not just that menu. And you're just like, I was in a menu, now all of a sudden I'm not. It like quits the whole thing and just so confused by it. But I will say that this is one of the reasons why I switched to Neovim is because I don't even want that at all. And I just want nice APIs.
Yes. Neovim is nice. Shout out to Neovim.
Shout out to Tej and other people's.
Yes.
I just know Tej by name and Famu. And Justin. Those are the only 3 people. And Bjorn, I guess. 4 people I know. I'm sure there's more. All right. This has actually been very interesting because you know a lot about text editors and you probably know a lot about text. You're stating things that I guess I should know, but I've never actually thought about it. The fact that everybody uses it just different enough that it's virtually impossible to build one without 1,000 people being angry at you at all times.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know yet how to think about it, but it's unlike any other product I've worked on because it's the bar. When do people switch their text editor, right? Is it because you have a killer feature? Is it because you have 1,000 half killer features? Is it because it was easy to jump over? And then you look at VS Code, right? Where I'm not a big VS Code fan, but you can't argue that it's a popular editor and a lot of people switched over to it. And I would guess that it's mainly because of, hey, we have a repo with 5 different language servers and linters and whatnot, and I just open VS Code and it parses the config and it does everything. I don't have to worry about any of it. And then you have like this adoption thing, but then people go in and they build like individual configurations where they say, oh, I have this one extension that I use for writing Markdown and I have a preview on the side or stuff like this, and I cannot live without it. But then you go in Vim land and you suddenly have like the sysadmins and they say, or not even sysadmins, the people who say someday they will have to sit down and defuse a bomb by using a stock Vim configuration or stock computer so they won't ever customize the Vim setup in order to save the world, right? So That's on the other end of the spectrum. And there's so much going on. There's so many preferences and so many different configurations. It's hard. It's hard to I don't know. It's an interesting market. Yeah.
Vi preppers. Yep, the VI preppers are real. They're ready. They're around the corner, and they know at one point they're going to be on an airplane. Some person's going to come busting out of the cockpit and be like, "Give me 10 cc's of binary search right now. We only have Vi. Who can do it?" And they're going to just stand up and be like, "It's me. I'm the Vi champion from 1983. Let's do this. I'm ready. I've been born for this moment of binary search."
Yes, and then they say, but we don't have a Colmac layout. It's standard US ANSI keyboard. And they go, well, we're all going to die. Sorry.
Sorry. Looks like I got 0 cc's of binary search due to the fact it's not Colmac. That's actually, that's really, really good. I really, really like that. Well, man, I really appreciating you just coming on here and just chatting about editors and all that. We're going to now transition off to the top shelf where we're going to have people kind of ask more, I guess, what we'd call intimate questions about what you're doing, how you're feeling about it, and all that. I have some more spicy questions about Zed. It won't be recorded, so you can say whatever you want.
Fair enough.
Unless if you want it to be recorded, then I will record it, but that's up to you.
I can't say yes to this without knowing what questions I will get,
No, that's the danger. You have to put it all on black or you don't. You don't know the outcome.
Oh my God.